G'day mates, it's Busta here. And before the episode begins, I would like to give Native another huge shout out for sponsoring this video. If you don't know by now, Native is a great company that provides safe, simple, effective products that people use in the bathroom daily. Their products are formulated without aluminium, parabens and talc, and instead are filled with ingredients found in nature. Native have been super generous and allowed me to try some of their products, and I've been using them for some time now, and the product has been reliably fantastic since day one. I just ordered and have been using the citrus and herbal musk deodorant, and the smell is always super fragrant, a little bit more subtle than the eucalyptus and mint, but still fantastic. And what I noticed about this one too is that, just like the eucalyptus, it lasted both on body and also in product really nicely. I'm a pretty busy guy and I work out a bit, and the deodorant I received and the stuff that I've ordered through them honestly has not let me down yet, and has always kept me smelling super fresh. And although Native is priced at a slight premium compared to conventional deodorants, it's really safe and effective. And like I said, I've actually enjoyed the product so much myself, I ordered more of their stuff and I've been using them consistently now for months. The other thing that I loved about Native was their commitment to eliminating things like aluminium, which may be linked to serious health ramifications, including breast cancer and Alzheimer's, from their products. The selection is really big, and along with some great reviews from customers, there's something for everyone on their website. Some of the scents that they have are coconut and vanilla, lavender and rose, and they also have this really cool seasonal one called pumpkin spice latte for Halloween at the moment. They also have free shipping and returns, and even offer a completely unscented formula and baking soda free formula for people with sensitivities. So, for 20% off your first purchase, visit nativedeodorant.com and use the promo code SCARED during checkout. That's 20% off your first purchase at nativedeodorant.com and use the promo code SCARED at the checkout. I hope you guys take up Native on their generous offer, and without further ado, let's begin. About 5 years ago, my wife and I went on a weekend camping trip with our two closest friends, another married couple. The campsite is just outside of Yosemite and absolutely beautiful. The beauty of it, and the creepiness of it, I suppose, is that you take a dirt road for about an hour and a half, I think, off the main road to get to it. It's extremely secluded, in other words, but never really felt threatening. It's a really popular campsite, so there were always people around, especially in the summer too, when this actually occurred. So the first day was pretty much awesome. I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remember having a great time. The campsites are all fairly close together and usually separated by various shrubs, etc. I remember too that we were all pretty pumped about the site that we got, as there were no neighbours on one side, just forest, and no one occupying the site closest to us. This is pretty uncommon here too, as these campgrounds stay fully booked throughout the summer. Day 2 started normally as well. We had breakfast, then we headed to the lake for a couple of hours. The lake was about a 20-minute hike from the main campground, and when we got back around 2ish I think it was, we noticed that the site next to us now had a silver rental car parked on it. Well, we didn't think much of it, and we just went about making a fire to cook with. At some point, we noticed the occupant of the site next to us, a pretty average-looking white dude, maybe early 40s, and honestly, he was just so average-looking that it's hard to even picture him. But we all immediately caught to the fact, though, that he was just constantly looking over at us. My friend Dave even made a comment to me under his breath, like, "Hey, you notice this guy keeps looking over here?" I remember feeling a little bit uncomfortable about that too, because we were still in our bathing suits from the lake, but I made a conscious effort to just ignore it. It's probably worth mentioning too that we were a little buzzed or drunk. Not out of control or anything, but just feeling pretty good. Now, throughout the afternoon and into the evening, we continued to notice this guy just constantly looking over at us. In hindsight, Dave, or I should have called him out for it. And I mean, this story doesn't make us look great, but whatever. I had been stressed at work prior to this trip, and I really didn't want to let some creepy dude throw off the relaxed vibe that we had. Stupid, I know, but that's what I was thinking. The alcohol, coupled with the fact that we honestly kind of felt bad for him, led to us to not confront him. Yes, it was very creepy, but I just told myself that he was just an awkward, lonely dude. Aside from the staring, though, there were a couple of mildly weird incidences that occurred leading up to the very weird stuff. The first was that, at some point, he left his site to go and do whatever, and while he was gone, a girl, probably in her mid-20s, our age basically, walked by and snapped a picture of his license plate. I remember asking her if she needed anything, and she smiled awkwardly and just kept walking. Dave and I both thought that was really odd, but were preoccupied with beer. Later into the evening, around 7ish, the camp host was doing her rounds checking people in, and she checked us in and moved on to him. I remember us all eavesdropping intently to hear what they were saying, too. I think we just wanted to hear what this creep sounded like, and he kept asking questions about the bathhouse. We didn't even know that there was a bathhouse, or even what a bathhouse was, but he had at least 100 different questions about it. Where is it? How late is it open? Is it private? Maybe not that weird, I suppose, but in context, it's definitely odd. So the sun started to go down, and we were all drunk by now, so we weren't too concerned with creepy dude anymore. At one point, we went for a walk, and we noticed him snooping around what we believed to be the bathhouse. And now I would call out this kind of behavior, but again, I was drunk and 5 years stupider at the time. We all laughed and just talked about how creepy he was. And back at the site, we continued to drink and have a good time. Now, at one point, the guy just started eating beans really aggressively out of a can in the light of his single lantern. No fire. He looked at us while doing it, and Dave and I just kind of snickered to each other at how weird it was. I don't think the girls noticed, but eventually we just decided to go to bed. I think the guy had actually left his site at this point. I kind of remember us making jokes like, I better not wake up to that dude looking in our window, ha ha ha. But anyway, my wife and I slept in our SUV with the seats folded down. Dave and Sarah slept in the camper shell of their truck, and I remember feeling a little creeped out as I fell asleep, but I shrugged it off. But at around 2:30 in the morning, both my wife and I were jolted awake by what we thought was a woman's scream. We both looked at each other and asked if the other had heard that. We came to the conclusion that it was probably just people at some other site being loud or something, and we decided to just go back to sleep. But as I was trying to go back to sleep, I just started feeling really unsettled. I decided to get out of my car and just go and take a look around. I cracked my door open, trying to be as quiet as possible. I had gotten about one leg out of the car when I heard faint but direct whispering coming from Dave and Sarah's camper shell about 4 feet away. I froze, and then I heard it again. I eventually realized that they were trying to tell me something. I whispered back, "What?" I then very clearly heard Dave say, "Start your car." I instantly realized that something was very wrong. So, rather than ask any questions, I climbed back into my car to start it. Right away, Dave and Sarah bursted out of the back of the camper and frantically jumped into my car, and they told me to drive. They were too freaked out to explain anything at that point, so I just kind of drove off aimlessly. Eventually, though, I pulled over, figuring that we were far enough away from whatever had freaked them out. And finally, Sarah calmed down enough to tell us what happened. So as she put it, she was woken up by a light coming from Creepy Dude's campsite. And apparently, he had set up lanterns and flashlights to spotlight himself, completely naked, masturbating in the direction of our cars. She also mentioned that he was flaccid and not able to finish. A gross detail, but I feel like it's important, because it gets weirder. At some point, he stopped and turned off the lights and began using a flashlight to signal across a small ravine that the campsite's backed up to. And I'm talking like Morse code kind of thing or something. Across the ravine, an old RV began using its headlights to signal back too. Dave was awake by this point. I questioned them on this detail, and they both said that it was very clear that they were communicating. And after that, he turned off his light. Keep in mind, it is absolutely pitch black out there at night. and after a few minutes they heard footsteps around their car, followed by a hard tap on the window. And that is what caused Sarah to scream, hence waking me up. And yes, at this point, I decided that we needed to call the police. The problem was, there was absolutely zero cell service at the campsite. Furthermore, it was at least an hour and a half up a service road from what was already a very remote part of the state, so leaving at night wasn't really an option. We decided the best course of action was just to alert the camp host. We drove around and eventually found the trailer that she lived in. She was understandably confused to be woken up at 3:30 in the morning, but was very responsive to her credit. She mentioned too that the guy was really weird when she checked him in, and called the police on her satellite phone. Apparently there was a massive wildfire burning that weekend, and the police said that they wouldn't be able to send anyone out until sunrise. And so the camp host basically said that there wasn't really anything that she could do beyond calling the police. It really sucked hearing that. I mean, basically, we were stuck in our car in the pitch blackness while some crazy masturbating dude was just out and about, and not to mention whoever was in that RV as well. But one more really weird thing happened that I think I should mention. At around 4 in the morning, we were all sitting in my car when a man in a hood just walked right up to the window. The second I noticed him too, I turned my engine and the headlights on. He immediately ran off into the trees, and we just kind of sat there in my car until sunrise. But once it was light out, we went back to the site to pack up our things. His car was still there, with blankets hung in all the windows. The whole thing just felt really gross, and we wanted to get the hell out of there, so we quickly packed up and we just left. A couple of hours after we left too, I actually got a call from the police. They said that they went out to the campsite and they actually questioned the guy, and he said that he was simply showering. The cop told me that there was nothing that he could do. It was our word against his, basically. He also questioned the people in the RV, and they said that they didn't know what he was talking about, but mentioned that, and I quote, "a very rude camper screamed in the middle of the night." In the end, the whole experience with the police was just really frustrating. I tried following up. I even tried getting help from a family member who's a sheriff, but even he said that there just wasn't anything that they could do, unless that particular police chief really wanted to investigate this guy. And so in the end, that's pretty much the story. I learned a lesson, though, about being polite when someone is making you feel uncomfortable. Nowadays, I'm much more aggressive with creepy people. I also know that it's easy to hear this story and wonder why Dave or myself didn't just confront the guy, especially when he's literally masturbating at the car you're sleeping in. But I don't know. I wish we would have showed more courage, but honestly, it was just really scary in the moment. I'm okay with admitting that as well. Nowadays, I think it's kind of funny, in fact, just how stupid we were and how bizarre the whole situation was. I also feel fortunate that nobody was hurt. Clearly, though, we were dealing with a very messed up individual who definitely had accomplices. And I can only imagine what their end goal was, and what they could have been capable of doing. I also think that they had done stuff like this before because the whole thing just seemed really orchestrated. And man, do I really wish that the police could have done something that night. So first, here's a little bit of information. This story goes back a couple of years now, and I was 14 and my sister was 20. My sister had an apartment in the city centre of one of the largest cities of the country that we lived in, and the city is really well known for its high drugs and crime rates and so on. So this experience is definitely not uncommon, however, still very scary. My school was only one train stop away, so I would stay at her place a lot. I lived about 6 stops away. My school was in a really bad neighbourhood too, and was for kids that couldn't stay in normal schools. Think of like drug abusers, drug dealers, criminals, etc. So I strategically picked my friends so I wouldn't have any problems, and if I did, I would at least be protected. Also, I've never joined or been born into a gang, but my 2 best friends, they and their families were. So, this is where it started. Because of said affiliations with gangs, I never hung out with my friends after school because it just simply wasn't safe to be seen with them. That is, until I did one day, and it was the biggest mistake that I've ever made. After years of being great friends at school, we thought it would be okay to start hanging out at my sister's place, and it was all fine. I figured that if I didn't mess with drugs or gangs, then I'd never be in contact with them anyway. Spoiler alert too, I was very wrong. Now one day I went to school, but found out that it was closed because of a holiday, so I decided to drop by my friend unannounced. And I immediately realized that that was not a good idea when I witnessed his dad and some others do something that I shouldn't have seen. So I ran to my sister's home and I called in sick from school the next 3 days or so. We figured that calling the police just wasn't an option, but nothing happened after I witnessed it, so the next week I just went back to school. My best friend wasn't there, but that was normal because that kid skipped class so many times it would be weirder if he did actually attend school. And quite honestly, everything seemed pretty normal, so my sister and I didn't really worry about it too much. So one night, later that week, at around 2 a.m., we hear someone trying to break in. So we flickered the lights and our dog started barking. Like I said before, it was in the city centre in a high-crime city, so she had break-in attempts before or drunk people messing against her door every few days. So at this point, we knew the drill. Making sounds and showing them that there's people home usually does the job. But not this time. At this point, my sister was calling the police and I was slamming cooking trays together, like screaming like a lunatic. Much like the I ain't never getting sleep because of y'all vine, and they just didn't go away. So the police said that they were sending someone. Now, we could see somebody's arm with a black shirt and gloves with a crowbar opening the window. And the dispatcher told us to go and hide in the bathroom or a place with a lock in it. This apartment was weirdly built in a way where you had the sleeping quarters, the living room and the kitchen room, and then a door to a walk-in closet, and at the back of the closet was the door to the bathroom. It was like some sort of Narnia shit if I'm being honest. Anyway, we hid in the bathroom and we could hear that the person was now inside of our house, and they ran off once they heard the sirens. The dispatcher said that the police had arrived, and when she said that we sent someone, we didn't expect to see 3 cars, 4 motors, and officers just everywhere. But they never caught the guy, and the police told us to watch out because this just definitely wasn't a normal break-in. They explained to us that when things like this happen, it's most likely a homicide attempt, and we had to go to the station to do the whole questioning thing. We explained everything, and the police said that it wasn't safe for us to go back, so we just never did. We got a temporary apartment to stay in while the investigation was still going on. We stayed there for about 2 weeks, and thank God that we did, because the day after we moved out, the apartment was burned to nothing but ashes. After investigating, they could see that it was purposely set on fire with the intent of actually burning the place down. This was actually ruled a second homicide attempt in 2 weeks, and we got help with moving to the other side of the country, and we're not using our full real names ever again. Thankfully, nothing related to this has happened since then, but we're definitely keeping an eye out. So some time ago, I just got in a loft bed. You know those black wooden ones from IKEA? Well, every night when I would go to sleep, I'd keep the TV on, which sat on my dresser across from the bed, because the noise would lull me to sleep, and I was sleeping in this loft bed. And well, that night, the noise and the light were keeping me up, thanks radiation, so I just decided to turn it off in the end. When I did, my bedroom was obviously pitch black, my door was closed, I didn't have any nightlights on or anything, and there were no other devices in the room. I rolled over onto my side, facing towards the wall, and I closed my eyes. A few minutes went by, and I was still wide awake. I was beginning to get frustrated because I just couldn't fall asleep. And just as I was thinking about this, I just got the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. You know how you can just kind of tell that someone's walked into the room? Almost like the energy or the density changes or something? Well, I had an older sister who had a bad habit of creeping into my room late at night to steal my stuff, so I thought, okay, it's just Hannah getting something. When I opened my eyes, my room was still dark and empty as far as I could tell. This told me that it wasn't her because whenever she'd come in, she'd leave the door open a crack and the hallway light would shine through. Plus, she's loud as hell, although she tried her best to be quiet so as to not wake me up. But my room was just absolutely silent. As soon as this realization dawned on me too, just an overwhelming sense of dread came over me. I knew that someone was in the room with me, just as I know my own name. But since the human mind needs tangible proof of everything, I decided to check just in case I was imagining it. If you know anything about loft beds though, you know that those things are loud as hell when you move, since you're basically propped up on stilts in the air. So, as I moved, I tried to do so as quietly as possible so that whatever was in the room with me wasn't aware that I was there and knew that it was there too. When I finally reached the slats and looked down through them, sure enough, there was this black figure in the shape of a person standing in front of my dresser. I straight up knew that whatever this thing was, it was evil because A, malevolence practically oozed from it and spread over my bedroom, and B, this thing was literally blacker than the darkness of my bedroom. Like, imagine being in a pitch black room and then a figure materializes, no tangible features, just a straight up filled in outline in the shape of a person that is darker than the darkest night that you've ever experienced. That was this thing. I don't know how too, but as soon as I laid my eyes on this thing, I saw it turn its head and look at me. Again, it didn't have any features, so I didn't physically see its eyes looking at me, but it's almost like I could feel it in my mind. It paralyzed me, and then it began moving and walking towards my ladder like it was going to climb up. I shot straight up in terror, knowing that if this thing got to me, something bad was going to happen, and reached out my arm to turn on my ceiling fan light. Luckily, it was literally less than a foot away from where I was. I yelled out some sort of prayer or something as fast as I could, my mouth stumbling over the words in my haste, and as soon as I finished, I just felt this overwhelming sense of peace and love come over me like I've never felt before, as if something was truly there protecting me. And that feeling came over me too. All sense of just darkness and negativity just shattered. I was just so calm and at complete peace, almost like I'd taken a Xanax or something, although I didn't know what that feeling was until years later. And I just flicked the light back off and I instantly fell asleep again. I haven't seen a shadow person since then, but I do feel people and things standing near my bed at night all the time. It'll wake me up, but I'll never see anything. Whenever I feel like I'm not alone too, I'll imagine a white light just surrounding me and emanating from my body and tell whatever it is, in my mind, that it's not welcome and has to leave. And it works every single time, pretty much without fail. I know some of that could just be in my head, but the experience that I had when I was 13 absolutely terrified me, and I know that it was real. And I hope that it never happens again. This happened when I was maybe 9 to 10 years old, I think. I have a sister who's 8 years younger than me, so she was about a year to 2 years old at the time as well. But during the summer months in Calgary, Canada, my family and another 3 to 4 families would frequently have barbecues out in Bowness Park. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with this park, it's a really large park in Calgary that has a plethora of picnic areas, playgrounds, and fountain areas for kids to play in. The area is large, so you have a 5 to 10 minute walk between the playground and the picnic areas and bathrooms and whatnot, so often us kids would just leave the adults to go play in the fountains or the playgrounds, and it was generally safe enough that this never made any issues. I recall one time we went and we were playing in our little bathing suits when I see this tall guy with glasses and a large cowboy hat sitting on a bench just outside the fountain area, just watching us. I was a naive kid, never had any prior talks about stranger danger or any of that stuff, and His cowboy hat made me automatically assume that he was a park ranger. A couple of hours after leaving the fountains to eat and chill with the adults, my baby sister announced that she needed to use the bathroom. She was nearly potty trained at this point, but not completely. My mother asked me to take her to the bathrooms, which was about a 10-minute walk away. My friend who was about my age came along with me, and I just remember walking with them when a guy comes up to us and says hello and starts a conversation. He was wearing a cowboy hat, and I again assumed that he was just another park ranger. He was asking for our names and our ages, and just overall had a very friendly demeanor. So, our idiotic selves talked openly with him. I did notice, though, that he had a particular interest in my baby sister, and at one point even asked to hold her, but she was fussy and just wanted to walk. This went on until we reached the bathrooms, where we said goodbye to him and we went in. Now, this is when even my naive self started to feel like something was wrong. My sister ended up having an accident on herself, and I asked my friend to stay with her in the bathroom while I ran back to the picnic area to get a change of clothes from my mother. But when I stepped out of the bathroom, I found that same guy standing a couple of feet away from the bathroom, clearly waiting for something. And that was when my alarm bells started going off. So, I ran back to the picnic area and told my mum that I think some guy was following us, and she came with me to the bathroom. And when the guy saw me with my mother approaching from about 100 meters away, he just booked it, power walking in the opposite direction as fast as possible without attracting any attention from anyone nearby. At the time, I pretty much completely forgot about what happened, and it wasn't until a couple of years later that I suddenly realized that the man waiting for us outside the bathroom was the same man who had been watching us play in our bathing suits hours before this. And so, I can only assume that he'd been waiting for hours until we left the adults after we'd gone swimming to approach us. Also, that particular park did not have any park rangers. I don't really have any idea as to exactly what his true intentions were, but I'm pretty sure that they were not good. So, I work in a group home for the developmentally disabled, and my usual shifts are the overnights, which begin at 11 p.m. and end at 9 a.m. the next day. And oh boy, let me tell you that this place is haunted. I've been working here for a solid 6 months now, and some really strange things have happened. In the first few months, 4.5 to be precise, nobody lived in the basement apartment of the home, and whenever you go down there, it's really creepy. Also, to mention, this is a finished, furnished basement apartment with its own kitchen, living room, bathroom, and bedroom, meant to house clients that book for a certain amount of time. Whenever it's empty, though, it just always sounds like something is down there, whether it be a person talking or walking or hearing the doors close or stuff like that. As a result, I keep the door connecting the basement to the top floor locked, but that doesn't stop whatever is down there. One night, as I was awake, I could hear solid heavy footsteps make their way up the stairs to the top, and then I hear the door handle try to turn, which almost put me into an anxiety attack, I'll admit, and led me to texting my coworker, who didn't help at all as she began sharing her own experiences with the house that have been very similar to mine. After the 4.5 months since I started working, we have a client who permanently moved into the basement. Best thing to ever happen, too. And why? Because we just chalk up all the noises to them now. However, the one shift I was working, they asked if I could go downstairs and help them, and I went downstairs and we got to talking, and they mentioned how sometimes that they think the basement is haunted. And I mean, what, right? They mentioned how they sometimes hear them walking around, and how one night they heard someone turn on the lamp in the living room. They heard the click of the string being pulled. Another incident, too, is when the client wasn't home, and due to certain policies and whatnot, we keep cameras in the upstairs and downstairs apartments in the living rooms. I was on the phone with my boss as the upstairs camera stopped working, and they were just guiding me through on how to reset it. But while waiting for it to boot up, they checked the camera downstairs and asked me to do a quick check on the client. I informed them, though, that the client wasn't home, and my boss then said that they could hear walking and somebody coughing down there. I can tell you right now that it was none of the clients upstairs, as they were sitting down on the couch the entire time watching TV, and none of them had coughed. So I quickly go downstairs with my boss on the phone, and as I said, there was no one down there. It was completely insane, but the next thing to recently happen was the little black cubed alarm clock that we have. This alarm clock that we have upstairs to go off at 6 p.m. to remind staff that it's bedtime. Well, on my overnights, I'm just laying in the dark while on my phone just browsing through social media, when the radio of the clock just turns on out of nowhere. The volume slowly goes up, then quickly goes down, and then just shuts off again. And after that, you can bet your bottom dollar that I unplugged that shit. It's in a separate room now, and I'm just done with all of these overnights. I was 10 years old. I lived in a relatively small town in Texas, in a small house with my mum. My mum has always had a very caring heart for those in need, so when my uncle called her one night and told her that he ran into a homeless girl at the local park, my mum offered to help her out for the day, or so that she could just get back on her feet, that sort of thing. When the girl arrived at my house, she said that her name was Laura. Laura told us that she was 16 at the time. She seemed like a bit of a shy girl. When my mother asked what she was doing out on the streets, Laura told us that she'd been kicked out by her mum because her mum had accused her of sleeping with her boyfriend or something. Laura told us that the allegation was not true. She told us that her mother's boyfriend was the one who came onto her, and my mum gave Laura a place to sleep in the guest bedroom that night. The next day, after breakfast, Laura asked to use my mum's house phone to call her mum to see if she could get some of her things from her mum's house. Laura's mum never answered the phone, and we just honestly felt bad for her. I mean, as a 10-year-old girl, I just couldn't imagine what she was going through. Later that day, I remember watching TV in the living room and just minding my own business, but I could feel someone staring at me, so I turned my head where I felt the gaze. It was sending me a glare so cold that if looks could kill, I would have dropped dead. I was confused and honestly a little bit startled. I turned my head away from her quickly and I just went back to watching TV, but I could still feel Laura's cold gaze. I couldn't understand what I'd done to her to cause her to look at me with such hate. And the next day, it happened once more. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I could just feel someone looking at me. I turned my head to the side and I saw Laura's head peering around the corner at me. Her eyes were dark and just laced with hatred. It frightened me, and I felt so confused as to why she was looking at me like this. I didn't want to cause any trouble, though, so I didn't bring up Laura's death glares to my mother at all. Later that night, my uncle had joined us for dinner. He had stopped by to see how everything was with Laura, and if we had any luck finding her a place to live with one of her family members. After dinner, I was washing my plate in the sink when I heard a loud growling sound coming from the dining room. I turned my head to see Laura shaking and growling like some sort of wild animal. My mum and uncle looked disturbed and worried. Laura threw herself into the floor and began thrashing around and screaming as if she were possessed or something. I was obviously absolutely terrified. It was truly a scary thing to witness. I mean, I grew up very religious, and my mum and uncle began praying out loud for Laura while I ran to my room and I just closed the door. And this went on for 2 whole hours, but it honestly felt like forever. I could hear Laura screaming like a madwoman and growling like just some sort of a deranged animal. I don't think any of us knew exactly what the hell was going on. After my mum and uncle had prayed for Laura for what felt like forever, Laura told us that she was free from an evil demon that had taken over her. None of us are sure what had actually caused her behavior. None of us are sure what even happened that night. But I remember peeking my head out of the room to see Laura just smiling happily while she curled up on the couch with a blanket. But her eyes opened and she shot a cold glare at me, and I quickly closed my bedroom door just in fear. I also placed a chair in front of my bedroom door that night and I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning by my mum waking me up, and she told me that she was taking me out to eat at my favourite restaurant. When I asked her if Laura was going, she gave me a serious expression and she spoke. Honey, your uncle's going to take Laura back to her mum's house. He slept on the couch last night after what happened. He and I were talking when the two of you had gone to sleep, and we pieced together that Laura made the entire performance up last night, she said. She's not stable, sweetheart, and we think that she might be dangerous. As I heard my mother say those words, relief just washed over me. I got dressed quickly, and I went to the car to go to the restaurant with my mum. When we got into the car, we saw Laura and my uncle getting into his truck with her, and Laura, man, she looked angry. Her expression was just honestly of a child when you don't give them what they want. They got into my uncle's car, though, and they just drove away. I'm 22 now, and I've never forgotten about this horrific incident that happened in my life years ago. And after that day, I never saw Laura or heard anything else about her ever again. So I'm a 24 female that absolutely fell in love with national parks. So much so that I decided to work full-time at one for about 3 years, in fact. This experience allowed me to meet some genuinely great people, but it also welcomed some just really sketchy individuals too. So this particular story starts with a man that we'll call Sam. Sam was a tall man with a shaved head and glasses. He was the kind of co-worker that would always just kind of linger awkwardly. He made everyone feel uncomfortable, but not enough to warrant any concern or anything. But the only issue that I really noticed was that he seemed like he had a drinking problem or something. He would show up to work still drunk and be sent home somewhat regularly. He seemed innocent enough, though, in a sort of socially awkward way. But I only worked with him for a few months before I was transferred to another location anyway, and was offered a pay rise. Now, a few months after starting the new position, I was in the employee break room just browsing my newsfeed when I received 5 messages within a 3-minute time span. I didn't even realize people could type that fast, but the messages, they were from Sam. It was something that caught me off guard too, because I'd never really spoken to him outside of my last position. The messages consisted of vague threats regarding my friends and myself, and he seemed upset to find out that I had gay friends and thought that I was tainted from association. I was less upset at his foul perception of me, and honestly, more pissed that he had targeted my friends, who were truly lovely people. I'm bad when it comes to taking the high road, so I decided to give this man a piece of my mind too. We weren't friends, hardly acquaintances in fact, so I didn't feel that his behaviour was appropriate, and quite frankly I was pretty pissed. Through our exchange, the original rude context of the messages became obviously threatening too. He told me that I should die along with my gay friends and that he'd be more than happy to end our misery. And needless to say, I was pretty shocked by this. His anger just didn't make sense to me, and I realized that I wasn't going to reason with this lunatic, so I decided to get HR involved. We work with the same company, so I thought that this would be the best route to prevent any further harassment. HR advised me to just block contact with him while they investigated, but to also alert authorities in case he decided to act out his threats. Authorities were also involved now, but they didn't seem too fazed by the messages that I had shown them. They almost seemed annoyed that I had even bothered calling them in the first place, but I filled out a statement and was told to contact them if anything progressed. And the very next day, I woke up to find trash just all over my front steps. Odd, but not too strange, I suppose. I actually thought it was a raccoon since I was in the national park, but then I saw a piece of paper with the words, "Watch your back, bitch," scribbled into it. I looked around the other neighbouring cabins to see if anyone was watching, but I didn't see anyone. So I just cleaned up the mess, but I saved the note. I wanted to show my sister who lived with me, and when she got back home later that morning, I called her up on the previous night's events. She didn't even know Sam because, like I said, we were not friends. But why would I mention him in my personal life? But I gave her a brief description of the guy in case she saw him lurking around or something, and then I headed to work. Now, halfway through my shift, I get a phone call from Alexa. She sounds shaken when she tells me, too, that a man matching Sam's description came to our cabin and asked about me and where I was. She played dumb and pretended not to even know who I was. After an awkward silence, too, he said, "I'll be back to get her later," and just walked away. She said that he sounded and acted like he'd been heavily drinking and had an intense coldness to him like she'd never seen before. And at this stage, I'm not messing around anymore, and I've watched enough crime shows to know that you shouldn't underestimate people like this. So I called the company's security team and I asked to have someone check on my sister and to be escorted home just immediately. I'm home within 20 minutes of her phone call. She gave security some information and they were able to find out which cabin he resided in. And apparently, he only lived about a 2-minute walk down our street, which was really unnerving. Park rangers are called again and they get some statements from both of us and decide to pay him a visit. And at least they seem to be taking the situation a bit more seriously now that he knows where I live. They come back after talking to his roommate. It's confirmed that he lives there but hasn't been home since the night before. Authorities put a word out to keep an eye out for Sam. They offer to have a unit keep an eye on us tonight as well, which we gladly accept, and we just go to bed. Eventually I wake up to 34 messages from an unknown number. And you guessed it, it was Sam again. He was very angry that I got HR and Rangers involved, and he said, "You're going to pay for this, you bitch. You messed with the wrong person. I'll end you." I email HR and present them with the screenshots of the messages and the texts. I demand that they resolve this immediately and want to set up a meeting with the director to discuss termination. See, in national parks when you're hired, the company provides cheap housing on site, and when you're fired, you have to leave the national park boundary within 24 hours. And so I thought that this would solve a majority of the issues. But they seem to agree with me and try to locate Sam for a meeting, and no one has seen him since the first messages began 2 days prior, so the park is basically on a manhunt now. The park is huge though, and it's easy to hide in if you don't want to be found. Thankfully though, his roommate alerted officials when Sam stumbled home drunk the next day, but they were able to speak with him and sober him up enough to take him to the HR building a couple of hours later. After the meeting, I'm notified that he's given a first and final write-up and will continue to work and live on my street. He apparently gave some sort of a sob story about his personal issues and promises to leave me alone and stuff. I was completely baffled that, even with him threatening to kill me, that they weren't going to fire him. Thankfully, the Rangers were equally surprised and still offered to provide surveillance just in case. It was quiet for 3 days too, and honestly, I thought that it was actually over and started to feel bad for Sam actually. I thought maybe he was honestly going through some stuff and I was just his mental punching bag or something. I didn't agree with it obviously, but I no longer felt as threatened, if that makes sense. That was until I received a knock on my door and opened it to find 2 Rangers wanting to speak with me. According to the Rangers and a few people from the HR department, Sam's roommate had called the emergency line when Sam started acting bizarre after the meeting and tried to convince him to lure me to a secluded place so Sam could take care of me. Thankfully, his roommate wasn't a psycho and reported the situation immediately once Sam went to the bathroom. Rangers were on site within minutes and had restrained Sam in order to search their cabin for evidence. And they ended up finding a loaded firearm and a suspected suicide note that stated that he was going to kill me and then take his own life. There was now plenty of evidence for a case, and he was successfully banned from all national parks in the US. I have since moved to a different state and have changed my contact information. He has since contacted me once to brag about how much I helped him secure unemployment benefits, which I quickly shared with officials. According to officials, he's restricted to a southern AZ county due to other crimes that he later committed and that I shouldn't worry about him finding me. As for HR, The director actually had to deal with harassment from Sam, after the banning that is, and asked me to testify on her behalf if it turned into something more sinister. I haven't heard anything since, so I'm assuming that she found another way to stop his assault. I still really don't understand why he decided to target me of all people. But we hadn't had very many interactions, even at work, and I've tried to dig through memories to find a single time that I may have invited this kind of behaviour, but I'm convinced that it was due to many factors, obviously including his instability and alcoholism. Either way, everything turned out safe in the end, but it was a wild ride, to say the least. About 2 years back, I experienced something that gave me chills to this day whenever I think about it. I had to submit a short film for my exam. We were short on time, so we had to shoot during our Eid holidays. It was the last day of our holidays and our last shoot day as well. We went to our location, which was actually my friend's house, and we had to set up our scene at the rooftop. Since we were really rookie, there was no big crew, lots of lights and stuff, just a few friends trying to get their work done. When we got there, it was after 12 at night. We were setting up our stuff. Our friend, whose place it was, wasn't with us. We're keeping check on the batteries, the cards and stuff beforehand. The shoot is an understood practice. But when we turned on our cameras, both of them ran out of batteries, which was really strange. But no one said anything, and we put them on charge since we had some time spare, and after a while, when the batteries were just enough to work with, we set up our scene. The terrace that we were on had merely 2 feet distance from the terrace of the house beside it. One wall of that place was completely covered with dense plants and leaves, and when we started shooting our scene, we noticed after a while that 3 kids are standing on that terrace, just watching us. That wasn't really too unusual for us, since people do notice you when you take out your cameras. Then we got busy in our work, and then I looked to my left to see if those kids are still there. Subconscious action, and they weren't there. And after that, I just got busy into the work again. When we were done with our shoot, it was probably around 2:30 a.m. I think. But those kids were there again, and their formation was the girl, about 8 or 9, was on the right, a boy, about 6 or 7 in the middle, and another boy, about 3 or 4 on the left. But the really strange thing was that all 3 of them were completely bald. One of my friends got suspicious and asked the kids, "Hey, kids, where's your parents?" The middle one replied, "I don't know, maybe they're having dinner." My friend called me to come closer, showed me their house, and asked me, "Are they having a candlelight dinner at this house or something? Why the hell is it completely dark?" I got a bit nervous at that. Another friend of mine asked them, "So, where did you guys come from?" And that girl replied with a word that is really rare in our language that only 2 of my friends knew the meaning. And what she said meant, "We are prisoners." We really didn't know what the hell that meant at that moment, but our friend just told us to not communicate with those kids anymore. So we went down and called our friend to say that we're free now and he should open the garage so that we can take our cars out. And when he came out, we asked him, who were those kids? And he said, "What kids? No one lives in that house." I was really nervous, so I shouted, "Dude, that's not funny at all." He got kind of angry and said, "Come." Now, that house had 2 gates, and he showed us both and said, "Look at that." And I cannot put into words what kind of spine-chilling feel that I had right at that moment when I saw those 2 giant padlocks. And then he told us that there used to be a mental asylum, NGO type, in this very house many years ago. And that was the last time that I ever went there. So 12 years ago, my grandmother slipped into dementia. She was 90 at the time, so it wasn't a horrible surprise, but still hard, you know. We moved her from her apartment that she owned in Las Vegas to a care facility close to our home, about 20 minutes outside of Vegas, I think. which meant that we actually rented out her apartment to what at the time seemed like a really nice guy. Him and his wife were actually mid-divorce though, and she fled back to her hometown in the Bahamas or something. He paid his rent religiously too, until, well, he just didn't. My father tried reaching out, but there was no response. Finally, he asked my brother and I to stop by the apartment to see what was up. We knocked on the door and he answers, and he looks really disheveled and just looked off. My brother asks if everything was okay, and he just kind of stared at us and didn't answer right away. Finally, he snapped out of it, and then he invited us in. My brother asked for the check and told him that we were on our way somewhere. He kept saying that I can write you a check, but come inside so I can write it. My brother forcefully asked again for the check, and I guess he realized at this point that we weren't going to come in. He looked just really sickly though, and he told my brother that he'd been having some chest pain. My brother told him to go to the doctors or call an ambulance, and he finally gave us the check and then asked one more time for us to just come on inside. We got the hell out of there though, and we gave my dad the check later that night. Now, 3 days later, Metro Police called my dad late at night. He was my grandma's power of attorney and was listed on the lease. They'd done a wellness check and they actually saw a body laying on the floor. And it was our tenant, who, when they gained access to his apartment, they also found a woman's body in the bathroom. Later, they discovered that he'd had a heart attack after he killed her. They never went into detail how she was murdered, and my folks had to call in a crime scene cleaning company to clean it all up. But my brother and I were completely stunned that he most likely murdered her after we came to collect the check, but he also could have killed her before then. Either way, why did he want us to come inside? If you look up Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, you'll find a lot of stories about hauntings and paranormal activity happening around that base. My whole family, aside from my dad, who was rarely home, experienced really odd and paranormal things in our house, and we were told stories from our neighbours as well. I was a really young kid when we lived there, 6 or 8 I think, but my memory is fairly clear about some of the things that happened to me. When we lived there, we would tell my mum about all the experiences that we were having, and she would just dismiss them. Finally, when we moved away, she told us her own experiences and said that she didn't want to scare us at the time. And I thought that I should finally share these since it's been a long time. They're going to be a bit jumbled and disorganized, so sorry about that, but it's the best that I can do. So firstly, I had a neighbour girl that I was friends with, who told me that she could speak to other girls through the air conditioning vents, and she would drop coins and little keychains down into the ducts for them. Along those same lines, my older sister once saw a black gooey mass ooze from one of the vents at the neighbour's house that she was babysitting for just come out of it. The girls she watched also had loud conversations in their bedrooms and would play with their friends in the walls during their bedtime. Now, I was playing with dolls once in my shared bedroom with the door shut. I remember the doorknob kept twisting and opening every few minutes, and I just told it to stop, and it did. On another occasion, I noticed one of my stuffed animals missing, and my mum has thrown it away, I thought. And apparently, I had actually told my mum that the plush was whispering to me, and I wasn't sleeping because of it. I don't remember any of that, though, but I trust my mum, and I believe she's telling the truth. My older sister and I shared a bedroom with bunk beds too, but we both slept in the bottom bunk together because there was just an odd presence to the top bunk that really creeped us both out. We all expressed feeling extremely uncomfortable walking up or down the stairs, like something was always watching us. Even my mum admitted to sprinting up and down them and constantly checking behind her for eyes and whatnot. My little sister had her own bedroom, and her toys would constantly go off at night, even if they were turned off. My mum also told us once, when we were older, that my toddler sister and her were lying down for a nap, and she heard someone in the room say, "I love you, Mummy." Confused, my mum said, "I love you too." But my sister said, "Who was that?" or something along those lines. And my older sister and I were playing at a friend's house at the time, so it was weird, but there was nobody else in that room. We have a ton of stories and lots from neighbours too, but I just wanted to share these ones because they were definitely the strangest and the creepiest. Thanks for listening. Oh, and if anybody else has any experiences while living on a base, I would sure love to see them in the comments below. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.